Tywin Lannister had never been a man to let sentiment rule him. In the days immediately following Robert's rebellion, while the dust of the fractured Seven Kingdoms still settled, Lord Tywin watched and listened more than he spoke. His presence, silent and sharp, cut through the cacophony of feasts celebrating the end of the war. Victory tasted bitter in his mouth. He had had one chance to preserve the honor of House Lannister in the aftermath of Aerys Dewey's madness. And though the Lannisters had ultimately sided with the usurper Robert Baratheon, Tywin found no comfort in fealty to a man he considered little more than a hammer-wielding brute. Yet victory was victory, and the name Lannister would not soon be forgotten. On one of those still, uneasy nights in King's Landing, Tywin learned of the boy. A child born in secrecy and brought by Eddard Stark from the Tower of Joy. Rumors blossomed like dark flowers among the court. The infant was the bastard son of Ned Stark, or so the whispers claimed. But Tywin had lived too long, and grown too shrewd, to accept such a story at face value. He pressed a spy here and a servant there, gleaning stray bits of information. Something about the boy was off. Something about Stark's reticence in acknowledging him, about the ever-present tension in Ned's shoulders whenever someone dared to ask of the child's mother, pricked at Tywin's mind. And then came the secret that changed the boy's fate forever. The child was not Eddard Stark's by blow, but rather the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. To Tywin, it was not so much the Targaryen blood that intrigued him as the potential for influence and power. If the child truly was a Targaryen princeling, Tywin needed only the right set of circumstances to harness that claim. Jon Snow, the name Eddard Stark had given him, could be the key to something. Tywin had raised 3 children of his own, Cersei, golden and cunning. Jaime, a splendid swordsman who lacked the patient cruelty Tywin considered crucial to leadership. And Tyrion, the malformed little wretch whose cleverness Tywin half despised for its source. But another child could be shaped. A clean slate. If the rumors were true, Tywin had an opportunity unlike any other. So he did what Tywin Lannister always did. He seized an advantage when he saw one. Over a private, tense conversation, Tywin offered Eddard Stark a bargain. Stark was reluctant, as honorable men so often were. He wanted to raise the boy in Winterfell, to protect him under the illusion that he was only a lowly bastard among the wolves. But Tywin had gold, and Tywin had power, and more than either, Tywin had a gift of reading men's hearts, and Ned Stark's heart was vulnerable. Tywin pointed out the precariousness of the boy's existence, if word ever slipped out that Jon Snow was a Targaryen heir. Robert Baratheon, a man known for his hatred of Targaryen blood, would not hesitate to put the boy to the sword, no matter Ned's pleas. The North alone would not shield Jon from Robert's wrath, nor from the ambitions of others who might whisper poison in the king's ear. "You want to protect the boy," Tywin had said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "You want to see him live? Then let him be under my roof. Let him be a Lannister. I will keep him safe from Robert. I will keep him safe from Varys and from Littlefinger, and all those who slither in the shadows of the Red Keep. My gold shall guard him. My name shall bolster him. And perhaps," Tywin thought, but did not say, "I shall shape him into something this realm has never seen before." Ned Stark was tormented for 3 nights, torn between an oath to his dying sister and the fear that if Robert ever discovered the truth, the boy would be executed. In the end, Ned's love for his sister's son, coupled with Tywin's ironclad vow to keep the boy's parentage a secret, sealed the decision. With a sober, trembling nod, the Lord of Winterfell surrendered the boy into Tywin's guardianship. The abruptness of that moment, the stoic suffering in Ned Stark's eyes, would stay with Tywin all his life. And so the child came to Casterly Rock. Tywin never told Robert Baratheon the truth. He never told his children the full truth either. When Cersei asked why her father had brought a northern bastard under their roof, Tywin only said the boy was to be a ward, fostering the bond between House Lannister and House Stark. To the outside world, Tywin permitted a slightly more elaborate version, that the boy was orphaned, and Lord Stark, out of gratitude for the Lannisters' role in ending the rebellion, had given the child to Tywin for fostering. Some believed it, many doubted. But Tywin's name was power enough to stifle further questions. Jon Snow, or Jon of House Lannister, as Tywin announced in a rare formal ceremony within the great hall of Casterly Rock, found himself stripped of the black and gray of the north. He wore red and gold, and he was taught to lionize his new banner. A toddler then, he could remember nothing of the north, nothing of the weirwoods or the smell of wolf fur. All he ever knew was the endless sea winds buffeting the rock's great promontory, and the echo of gulls along the stony shores. And, of course, the stern presence of Tywin Lannister. It was a presence that shaped Jon's earliest memories. When Jon was 3, Tywin would have him come to the audience chamber each morning to watch as the steward read petitions, or as bannermen and knights came to pay respect. Jon was given no tasks. He was only told to observe. Often, he sat at the foot of Tywin's gilded chair, hugging his small legs close to his chest, silently absorbing every exchange. If he tried to doze or fidget, Tywin would stop the proceedings with a single cold glance. That was often punishment enough. When it wasn't, Jon would suffer a further lesson. A day locked in the reading room, forced to recite the history of House Lannister under the watchful, judging stare of Maester Crelin. By the age of 5, Jon understood politeness. He knew to hold doors, to bow in greeting, to speak only when spoken to. He had begun to grasp the delicate hierarchy of the Westerlands. He learned that the Lannisters were the mightiest house in the region, that men bowed their heads and bent their knees as much out of fear as respect. He came to suspect that everything he was taught was preparing him for a role larger than that of a simple foster child. Children, though, rarely question beyond the immediate. Jon was quiet, even then, which Tywin took as a promising trait. Young as he was, Jon sensed Casterly Rock's grandeur. Its ramparts towered over the harbor, and its many tunnels wound deep into the stone beneath the fortress. The private living quarters for the Lannisters were lavish, yet cold with history. Marble lions roared in every corridor, and heavy golden draperies let in only thin beams of sunlight. Outside, the sea battered the walls with relentless fury. On especially wild nights, the wind howled so fiercely that Jon would clutch his blankets and tremble, thinking the waves were roars of 1,000 real lions come to devour him in his sleep. He had siblings of sorts, Cersei, Jaime, and Tyrion, but they were grown or near enough. Cersei spent most of her time in King's Landing as the wife of King Robert Baratheon, which left Jaime occasionally at the Rock when he was not serving with the Kingsguard, and Tyrion, who lingered in the fortress with his books and his wit. Of the two, Tyrion was the one who fascinated Jon. Tyrion had a quick smile that hid a deeper sadness. He spoke to Jon kindly, if with a sardonic tilt to his words. "You may bear our name, Jon," Tyrion said one autumn evening in the library, as the boy labored over a heavy tome describing the various castes of Valyrian steel. "But you'll notice you don't exactly shine like the rest of us." Jon did not know how to answer, so he stayed quiet. "Come now, don't pout," Tyrion added, sipping a cup of wine. "I'm the last person who'd blame you for not shining. It's our father's, Lord Tywin's, way of showing the world he can do as he pleases. But do you know what that means for you?" "No," Jon answered, looking up from the book. His eyes were large, uncertain. Tyrion set his wine aside and leaned forward. "It means you've no choice but to become something formidable. If Tywin Lannister invests so much in you, do you think he'll be pleased if you turn out a dullard or a fool? I suspect he'd consign you to a garrison at best." He paused. "But you won't be a dullard, will you?" Jon shook his head. He did not want to be cast aside. More than that, he wanted to please. He had been trained, subtly, from the time he arrived, to revere Tywin's approval. When his foster father nodded and said, "Well done," after Jon answered a question correctly or showed skill with a wooden sword, it was like receiving a precious gem. At 6, Jon was assigned a squire's regimen. The master of arms, a tall grizzled knight named Sir Kevin's man Allard, had instructions from Tywin. Spare no rod. If the boy fails to meet your standards, punish him. If he meets them, raise the bar. Thus, every morning, Jon was up before dawn, practicing sword forms with wooden wasters. By midday he was in the practice yard with older squires, running drills. By evening he was quizzed on heraldry, the art of hawking, riding, and courtesy. At night he collapsed into bed so exhausted that he scarcely had time for childish dreams. Sometimes he spotted Tyrion watching him from a high balcony, a mocking grin on the dwarf's face, as if to say, "I warned you." But then Tyrion would raise a cup in silent toast, as if also cheering him on. In a strange way, it heartened Jon. Jaime was a different presence entirely. When he was at Casterly Rock, he was the man Jon longed to impress. Jaime's skill with a blade was unparalleled, and the regal way he carried himself, as though the whole world was fashioned for his amusement, dazzled Jon. Yet Jaime seemed uninterested in the boy's adoration. Sometimes he ruffled Jon's hair, calling him little cub, but more often he was concerned with his own matters, going off on hunts with old friends, or traveling to King's Landing for his duties. Jon never got close to him. As for Tywin, the father figure around whom Jon's entire life revolved, he remained a distant son, blinding, powerful, always out of reach. From him, Jon learned discipline, if not warmth. He learned to hold his head high, to speak with measured gravity, rather than impulsive outbursts. He learned the significance of the Lannister words, "Hear me roar," and he learned to hide his own vulnerabilities, for Tywin had no patience for tears. Pain, in Tywin's mind, was a teacher, fear was a tool. In time, Jon grew from a spindly child to a wiry, determined boy. By his 10th name day, he could hold his own with practice swords against boys 3 and 4 years his elder. He could recite the lineages of all the great houses of Westeros and identify their sigils. And yet, for all his skill, he remained uncertain of his place. He was not a true Lannister by blood, though the name was bestowed upon him. He noticed the way the household knights and servants sometimes looked at him with puzzlement or scorn. Tywin insisted they treat him with respect, but one cannot command genuine devotion. And in his quietest moments, Jon felt a hollowness in his chest, a feeling that he did not truly belong. This sense of displacement came to a head one day in the training yard. Jon was sparring with Prince Tommen Baratheon, who had been sent to foster at Casterly Rock for a time. Tommen was younger by a couple of years, timid and plump, but good-hearted in a way that left him easily startled by Jon's intensity. With wooden swords in hand, they circled each other. Under the watchful gaze of Ser Allard, Jon pressed the attack. Tommen stumbled, tears welling up, and yielded. Jon stepped back, sweat drenching his hair, breathing hard. A hush fell as one of Tommen's guards quickly moved to console the prince. In that hush, Tyrion's voice cut through the air. "You fight like a northerner, Jon." Jon turned, unsure if that was praise or insult. But the small gathering of onlookers, some knights, some high-born guests, shifted uneasily. Tommen's tears had aroused their sympathy, and they looked at Jon with distaste. There he stood, a youth whose dark hair and gray eyes seemed at odds with the golden colors he wore. Tyrion continued, "That's not necessarily a bad thing. Northerners have a certain ferocity, but perhaps Lord Tywin would prefer you fight with more Lannister elegance?" His lips curled wryly, and he raised one eyebrow. Jon felt both singled out and confused. The truth was, he had no recollection of the North, but sometimes, in the deepest recesses of his mind, he dreamed of cold nights and howling winds. He had no memory of his mother or father, only faint glimpses that might have been illusions. But if he truly had that northern blood, if that explained his black hair and gray eyes, then perhaps a part of him would never be as Tywin wanted. As if reading his thoughts, Tyrion offered a cryptic shrug, then walked away, leaving Jon with a swirl of conflicting feelings. Later that evening, Tywin summoned Jon to his solar. The room was dimly lit by a single candelabrum, and the golden lion heads carved into the high-backed chairs flickered in the uncertain light. Tywin sat behind his massive oaken desk, reading a parchment. His face was as unreadable as ever. When Jon stepped inside and closed the door behind him, he bowed. "You sparred with Prince Tommen today," Tywin said without looking up. Yes, my lord. You made him cry. He's younger and smaller, Jon admitted. Perhaps I was too rough. Tywin set the parchment aside and lifted his gaze. His eyes were chips of green ice. Do you know why we agreed to foster Tommen here? Jon shook his head. I only heard talk that the Queen Cersei, wanted him to be exposed to the West, that he might learn from House Lannister's ways. Precisely, Tywin replied. The boy is meant to be the future of House Baratheon, and indirectly, a reflection of House Lannister's influence. Therefore, he is not here to be beaten into a puddle of tears by you. A pang of guilt and confusion spread through Jon's chest. He wanted to protest that it had only been sparring, but he understood Tywin's meaning. I'm sorry, my lord. I didn't mean to harm him. Tywin's lips thinned. Intent is irrelevant. Appearance is everything. Today you appeared a bully. That does not profit us. See that you conduct yourself with dignity, and show some measure of restraint. Jon bowed again, feeling shame wash over him. Yes, Lord Tywin. He turned to go, but Tywin's voice stopped him. Wait, there is another matter. Jon waited, head bowed, heart pounding. You are approaching your 11th name day, Tywin said, lacing his fingers together on the table. Soon, you will be old enough to truly represent House Lannister. It is time you understand the significance of our name. Men call us proud, and they are right. We are the lions. We do not scramble in the dirt for scraps. We take what is ours with cunning and steel. The realm respects us because we have earned that respect through centuries of unwavering authority. Jon looked up slowly, meeting Tywin's gaze. Do you wish to serve House Lannister, Jon? Tywin asked. Yes, Jon said, his voice quavering a little, for he felt the weight of the question. I do. Good. In time I will send you to King's Landing. You will learn courtly manners not only from your training here, but also from observation of the capital's politics. You will see how my daughter, the Queen, wields her influence, and how my son Jaime serves in the King's Guard. You will learn to navigate the Viper's Nest. You will learn to navigate the Viper's Nest. He let silence hang for a moment. And you will carry the name Lannister with pride, for you are my ward, and in some ways, my heir. The remark struck Jon like a thunderbolt. My heir. He had never dared to believe Tywin might so openly claim him in that capacity. His mind raced. What did it mean for Tyrion? For Jaime or Cersei? But Tywin was not a man who repeated himself, and he ushered Jon out with a dismissive wave. That night, Jon could not sleep. He lay in bed, the faint wash of moonlight illuminating the red and gold drapery, thinking about Tywin's words. Slowly, an exhilaration grew within him, but so too did a quiet fear. He was to be shaped, molded, into something that Tywin valued. Would he lose himself entirely to that shape? Yet any second guessing was swiftly buried beneath a boy's longing for approval. If Tywin Lannister had chosen to name him heir in some form, it meant he was not worthless. It meant he might truly become a lion of the rock. That was the night Jon truly devoted himself to the path Tywin had laid out, burying in the depths of his heart any doubts, any sense of incongruity he felt upon seeing his own reflection in the polished metal mirror, dark-haired and solemn-eyed, as though a shadow had crept into Casterly rock. In the years that followed, Jon's training intensified. He was taught more than swordplay. He studied accounts of harvest yields, the intricacies of coin management, the laws of inheritance. He learned to speak with confidence, to present an argument with clarity, to observe the expressions of men in negotiations and pick out the telling flicker of fear or avarice. Tywin had him sit at small councils of the Westerlands, listening to disputes about trade or borders. Sometimes, after the councillors had gone, Tywin would quiz him. What was the underlying motive of Lord Marbrand's complaint? And Jon, who had watched the agitation in Lord Marbrand's eyes, guessed. He fears the new trade agreement will cut his share of the port taxes. Tywin would grunt. Indeed. So what do we do about it? Jon would think carefully. Placate him with a minor concession, so he believes House Lannister is generous, but ensure the major profits still flow to the rock. Tywin would nod, almost imperceptibly, and a spark of approval would flicker in those cold green eyes. Precisely. Never forget, the ultimate aim is power in the hands of Lannister. Everything else is negotiation. The older Jon grew, the more he understood the realm. By the time he reached 14, he had accompanied Tywin to King's Landing on 2 brief visits. The capital astounded him in its bustle, its squalor, and its grandeur, though Tywin found it all faintly distasteful. They stayed in the Red Keep, where Jon finally met King Robert more closely. Robert was broad in the chest, boisterous, reeking of ale, and quick to laugh as he regaled Tywin with stories of his hunts. He barely acknowledged Jon. Cersei, however, greeted Jon with a small, curious smile. She looked older than her years, worn by a certain bitterness that clung to the corners of her mouth. But she was beautiful, with shining golden hair, and eyes that watched everything. "So this is the boy you've raised at the Rock," Cersei said, lightly resting a hand on Jon's cheek. He bowed to her, unsure of the proper address for a woman who was both his foster sister and his queen. "He has grown, father." Tywin inclined his head. "He has. And I trust he shall continue to grow into a fine young man, devoted to House Lannister's interests." Nandome. Cersei's eyes lingered on Jon, a flicker of something akin to suspicion crossing her face. Jon wondered if she, like Tyrion, suspected there was a deeper story to his presence. Yet she did not press. Instead, she turned to Tywin and spoke in that cool, imperious tone she had learned from him. "If you trust him, father, then so do I." That night, Jon roamed the Red Keep's halls, marveling at the Targaryen tapestries. He found one that depicted the moment Aegon the Conqueror landed, dragons overhead, forging the 7 kingdoms into one realm. Gazing at it gave him an odd tingling in his fingertips. The fleeting sense of connection. Had the Targaryens truly been so fearsome? The dragons looked unstoppable, scorching armies in the swirling threads of the tapestry. Jon felt his heart beat faster, imagining the blazing fury of dragonfire. He did not know why it stirred him so. He only knew it felt like a half-remembered lullaby in the back of his mind, calling him to something ancient. Then Tyrion shuffled into view, wearing a simple tunic and a half-smile. "Fascinating, isn't it?" Tyrion said, glancing up at the tapestry. "The rise and fall of House Targaryen. So much blood, so many betrayals, and in the end, well, here we are." He looked sideways at Jon. "Do you wonder sometimes, my dear foster brother, what your place in the world truly is? We passed those grand tapestries of dragons breathing fire, and we wear a golden lion upon our breast, roaring defiance. Do you feel the lion within you?" Jon swallowed. He wasn't sure how to answer. "I do," he said eventually. "Lord Tywin has taught me all I know." Tyrion chortled. "Yes, indeed. I'm sure you'll make him proud." He studied Jon's face intently. "But some nights, perhaps you dream of snow. White, endless snow. That is what I would dream of if I had Stark blood in my veins." Before Jon could stammer a response, Tyrion changed the subject with a wave of his hand. "No matter. I'm off to find a cup of wine and a willing ear for my soliloquies. Good night." Jon stood there, unsettled. The tapestry's dragons seemed to leer at him, as if mocking his confusion. If Tyrion guessed at some great secret, it was only that Jon's mother might have been a Stark. That, at least, was the rumored story Tywin let slip sometimes to quell curious minds. Jon wondered if Tyrion might guess there was more to it still. The truth was that even Jon himself had no idea he was Rhaegar Targaryen's son. Tywin had never breathed a word of that truth. He had locked it away, as though burying it in the deepest vaults of Casterly Rock. The next day, they returned to the Westerlands. Over the next several years, news drifted from King's Landing of Robert's growing excesses, of petty squabbles among the small council, of rising tensions with House Stark in the north, and of whisperings from across the narrow sea about the last Targaryens, Viserys and Daenerys. Jon heard these rumors in snatches. He was not always privy to Tywin's personal counsels. Still, he caught glimpses of the political web that Tywin spun. Meanwhile, Jon's prowess in the yard became something of a legend among the Lannister bannermen. He was quick, disciplined, able to anticipate an opponent's moves. He fought with a controlled fury that unsettled older knights who faced him in sparring. He poured everything into these lessons. When the Master of Arms barked orders, Jon responded. When asked how he found the stamina to train so relentlessly, Jon only smiled politely. In truth, he wanted to be worthy of the pride Tywin rarely displayed but occasionally hinted at. That single flicker of approval from the old lion was enough to make Jon push past his limits. He was forging himself into the perfect scion of House Lannister. At 16, Tywin presented Jon with a finely crafted longsword. The hilt was gilded, the pommel shaped like a lion's head. The blade was castle-forged steel, bright as a polished mirror. Jon's heart hammered in his chest as he held the sword aloft, feeling the perfect balance. It was a knight's blade. Tywin's voice cut through the moment. I expect you to wield it well. A sword is a tool, but the mind that guides it is more important. Never forget that. Jon bowed deeply. I will not forget, my lord. That night, Jon could scarcely part from the blade, inspecting every detail. He felt as though Tywin had knighted him in all but name, though officially Jon was still a squire in the eyes of tradition. He had served a brief squirehood under a Lannister knight, and though the man had never questioned the arrangement, it was clear to all that Jon outranked many squires by birth, well, by the name he carried, anyway. He had reached an age where the stirrings of manhood brought new thoughts, about women, about marriage, about the future. Would Tywin see him wed to a high-born lady, forging an alliance for House Lannister? The notion made Jon anxious. Whom might Tywin choose? A Westerland's bride, no doubt. Perhaps a daughter of House Marbrand or House Crakehall. Or something more ambitious, a match to strengthen ties with another great house. Jon tried not to dwell on it, but it weighed on him as time went on. In the autumn of that same year, Tywin decided Jon would accompany him to Riverrun for a negotiation with House Tully. Tensions were rising in the Riverlands due to the friction between King's Landing and Winterfell. Ned Stark had become Hand of the King, and rumors circulated that he was stirring up trouble by investigating mysteries around the death of Jon Arryn. Tywin wanted to ensure the Tullys remained either neutral or amicable to the Westerlands. The journey to Riverrun took them across rolling plains and along the Red Fork. Jon, riding beside Tywin's carriage, marveled at the green beauty of the Riverlands. He wore a cloak of crimson wool, clasped at the shoulder with a golden lion. His black hair, grown to a modest length, was tied back neatly, and the longsword Tywin had given him hung at his hip. The Lannister entourage was sizable, 24 knights and men-at-arms, plus servants and baggage. At every inner crossroad, people gawped at the sight of so many proud lions riding east. That night, as they camped beside the Red Fork, Tywin had him read a letter from Tyrion, who was in King's Landing. The missive spoke of swirling intrigues, the king's tournaments, the queen's manipulations, and the arrival of travelers from the free cities. Tyrion's wry commentary was peppered with hints that something ominous was in motion. Jon read it aloud to Tywin, who frowned at certain passages. Tyrion suspects that Ned Stark has discovered some secret about Cersei's children. Tywin said, his tone tense. Absurd. My daughter knows better than to give him anything to seize upon. Jon tried not to show confusion. Should we be concerned? Tywin's jaw clenched. We must always be concerned when it comes to the Starks. They are earnest, but their sense of honor can become inconvenient. We will see how it plays out. He waved a hand, dismissing the matter. Get some rest. The day's ride was long. Jon bowed and retreated to his tent, but his mind spun with questions. What secrets could Ned Stark possibly have discovered? At Riverrun, they were met with courteous formalities by Sir Edmure Tully, the Lady Catelyn Stark's brother, who was holding the castle in her absence. The official reason for their visit was to discuss trade along the Red Fork, but Tywin's manner suggested a deeper probe. He wanted to gauge the Tully stance on the blossoming conflict in the realm. Over lavish dinners, Tywin exchanged pleasantries with Edmure and the Tully bannermen. Jon observed quietly, offering a polite smile when introduced. Some recognized the name Lannister but quirked a brow at the dark-haired youth. Others did not question it. Bastards and wards existed in many great houses, after all. On the second evening, as the feast wound down and the lords drifted away to private discussions, Jon found himself alone on one of Riverrun's balconies, gazing out over the rushing waters that encircled the castle. The moonlight silvered the currents, and the air smelled of damp stone and river reeds. A strange ache formed in Jon's chest, some longing he could not name. He heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he found Sir Edmure approaching. The Tully lord, only a decade older than Jon, carried a cup of wine and wore a faintly uncertain expression. "Jon of House Lannister," he greeted with a half-smile. "Have you found our castle to your liking?" "It's beautiful, my lord," Jon replied politely. Edmure took a breath, seeming to weigh his words. "If I may speak plainly, I'm curious. We've heard little of you in the Riverlands. Most wards of Lord Tywin remain in the shadows, but you seem, I don't know, different. There's a seriousness to you." "Scion." Jon felt a flicker of caution. "Lord Tywin has high expectations," he said carefully. Edmure leaned on the balcony railing, swirling the wine in his cup. "I wonder, have you ever met Lady Catelyn? She's my sister, wife to Eddard Stark. If you are a ward from the north, perhaps you crossed paths." Jon hesitated. "No, my lord, I have not had the pleasure." Edmure nodded slowly. "Strange times, are they not? Eddard Stark in King's Landing, apparently nosing about in matters better left alone." He chuckled mirthlessly. "I can only hope no harm comes to my sister or her children in the midst of this unrest. The realm is uncertain." Jon sensed a question hidden in Edmure's tone. Perhaps Edmure wondered if the Lannisters might strike at the Tullys, or if the Rock was preparing for conflict. Jon's training guided his response. "Lord Tywin believes stability is paramount for the realm," he said, repeating a line often spoken by his foster father. "I'm sure he wants no harm to come to House Tully." Edmure's smile was polite, but shadows flickered in his eyes. He said no more, only excused himself politely. Left alone, Jon wrestled with his thoughts. Would there be war? And if so, which side would Tywin push him onto? The realm was a board of civitas, and Tywin was a master who moved his pieces with cold calculation. Jon was but one piece among many. Yet a small spark of defiance kindled in him. He did not want to be a piece, not truly. He yearned, in some hidden corner of his heart, to define himself on his own terms. Before he could follow that thought further, another figure appeared at the far end of the balcony. A slender man with thinning hair and a pointed beard. Petyr Baelish, Master of Coin, if Jon recalled correctly. Littlefinger. He offered Jon a measured bow. "Jon Lannister, I presume," he greeted, his lips curling in a disarming smile. "What a pleasure. I've heard intriguing whispers about you." Jon bowed in return, wary. He knew from Tyrion's letters that Baelish was dangerous. "Lord Baelish," he said curtly. Littlefinger leaned against a stone parapet, glancing out at the moonlit waters. "Your father, pardon me, your foster father, Lord Tywin must be quite proud to have shaped a new heir in his own image." His eyes flicked over Jon. "Yes, I see the stern posture, the calm expression. He's taught you well." Jon bristled, but kept his composure. "I serve House Lannister," he replied. "And you serve the king." Baelish chuckled. "I serve many masters, or perhaps none. One can never tell with me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Tell me, if you will, how goes life in Casterly Rock for a young man such as yourself? Have you grown bored behind those lion gates?" Jon frowned, uncertain of Baelish's motives. "I do as Lord Tywin wishes. Boredom is not a concern." Littlefinger nodded, feigning a sympathetic sigh. "Of course. I only ask because your presence in Riverrun is something of a curiosity. Still, far be it from me to question the designs of the mighty Tywin Lannister. I merely gather rumors, as that is my role in King's Landing. If you ever have a rumor to share, do call on me. I have a hobby of collecting secrets." Jon said nothing, letting the silence stretch. After a moment, Baelish shrugged, offered a smile that did not reach his eyes, and departed. Jon exhaled, feeling as though he'd navigated a narrow channel beset by hidden rocks. The next day, negotiations concluded. Tywin expressed measured satisfaction and announced their departure. On the road home, Tywin only commented once on Baelish's presence. "Littlefinger is an annoyance I'd rather not abide. Keep your guard up around him at all times." Jon nodded, storing the warning away. Weeks later, back at the Rock, a raven arrived with news that upended the realm. Ned Stark had been arrested for treason. King Robert was dead. Joffrey Baratheon, the new king, had commanded Ned's execution. In a single stroke, the realm was plunged into chaos. Robb Stark was rallying the North, proclaiming himself king in the North. The Riverlands rose in rebellion. Renly Baratheon had declared himself king, and Stannis followed suit. The War of the Five Kings had begun. Tywin summoned his bannermen at once. Armies would march. Jon found himself at the heart of preparations. He was no longer just a boy. He was a young man with responsibilities. Tywin often conferred with him, speaking in short, decisive statements about supply lines, strategy, and alliances. Yet amidst the swirl of war, Jon discovered a new, unsettling detail. The Starks were now sworn enemies of the Lannisters. And if rumors were true, Ned Stark had died at Joffrey's command. Something in Jon twisted at that realization. Ned Stark was the man rumored to be his father. He was no father to Jon, of course. But that rumor had defined part of Jon's existence at the Rock. Now the man was gone, executed like a traitor. And war raged on. Jon did his duty. He donned armor, bearing the Lannister lion. He rode at the head of a column alongside Sir Gregor Clegane and other fearsome knights. They marched east to face Robb Stark's host, which threatened the Lannister hold on the Riverlands. In the nights leading up to the first skirmish, Jon lay in his tent, listening to the distant whinny of horses and the muters of soldiers. He wondered what Tywin truly expected of him if he came face to face with the young wolf, Robb Stark. Would he fight him to the death? Was that not a twisted irony? Battle came swift as lightning near the Red Fork. Robb Stark's outriders clashed with the Lannister vanguard. Jon, sword in hand, charged into the fray. The clang of steel and the screams of men filled the air. He fought methodically, dispatching foes with the skill hammered into him over years of training. Blood spattered his armor, and he felt a numbness in his chest. This was real, not a practice yard. The taste of iron filled his mouth, and the stench of gore assaulted him. He pressed on, executing Tywin's orders. In the confusion, he caught a glimpse of a boy about his own age, a tall figure with reddish-brown hair, wearing a wolf's head helm. Robb Stark. Their eyes locked for the briefest instant across the churned battlefield. Jon could see the fierce determination in Robb's gaze, the heartbreak that likely lingered from his father's death. Time seemed to freeze for a heartbeat. A wave of noise and bodies surged between them, and they lost sight of each other. When the dust cleared, the Lannisters had suffered a harsh blow. Lord Tywin, realizing Robb Stark's main force had outmaneuvered them, ordered a retreat to Harrenhal, intending to regroup. Jon rode alongside him in the battered column of survivors, his armor dented and splattered, his sword arm aching. The men around him whispered about the young wolf's cunning, about how he'd feinted the Lannisters and inflicted stinging losses. In the gloom of Harrenhal's monstrous halls, Tywin convened his remaining lords. He did not rage or wail. Instead, he methodically reassessed their resources. Jon sat by his side, silent, watching Tywin's eyes rove over the map. They had a new problem. King Renly was marching north from the Reach, Stannis was fortifying Dragonstone, and Joffrey was precariously holding King's Landing. War on all sides. Tywin decided to send Tyrion to King's Landing as Hand of the King in his stead. Jon felt the tension in his foster father's voice. It was a precarious gamble, but Tywin wanted one of his own to oversee Joffrey's rule. While Tyrion departed for King's Landing, Tywin planned to confront Robb Stark in the Riverlands. Over the next few months, battles raged. Jon fought in several skirmishes, growing in battlefield experience. He learned the horror of war, the burned farms, the weeping small folk, the cruelty of men like the Mountain who rode with them. He also found himself questioning the righteousness of their cause. Were they not marauding across lands that had done them no personal wrong? But such questions were a luxury he could not afford. He was a Lannister. Tywin's will guided him. Yet as the campaigns dragged on, a rumor reached Jon's ears that unsettled him. People whispered that Eddard Stark had protected some great secret, that Joffrey was not Robert's true-born son, and that Ned Stark had known. If so, Joffrey might be a false king. The realm might be in the grip of a usurper ironically calling himself a true king. Did Tywin know? Did Cersei? Jon could not be sure, but the rumor gnawed at him, especially when combined with the knowledge that he himself might not be who he was told he was. Then came the day Tywin drew Jon aside after a particularly grueling fight near the Blackwater Rush. They were on campaign, camped in muddy fields. Tywin's usually immaculate armor was stained and scratched, though his eyes were as cold and precise as ever. "Jon," Tywin said, studying the young man, "you have served House Lannister ably, but the time has come for me to share something with you, something that you must guard with your life." Jon's pulse quickened. He felt sure Tywin had discovered something about Joffrey's parentage. Or perhaps it was about him. But to his shock, Tywin said, "You are not Ned Stark's bastard, and you are not a child of House Stark at all." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Your father was Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, and your mother was Lyanna Stark." The tent spun around Jon. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. All the half-buried instincts, the strange pull he felt toward dragon lore, the tapestry in the Red Keep, all of it came flooding back. "Why? Why are you telling me now?" Tywin's expression was unreadable. "Because the realm is at war, and the tides shift swiftly. If the truth of your parentage proves useful to me, I may one day reveal it. But for now, you are a Lannister. You serve our cause. Understand, I did not raise you as a Targaryen. I raised you as a lion. The Targaryen name means nothing except as a weapon I may choose to wield." "None." Jon's head spun. He remembered Tyrion's cryptic remarks, the lost glimpses of a mother he never knew, the faint recollections of warmth and a woman's whispered pleas for Eddard Stark to keep him safe. So it was all true. Does the king, Joffrey, know? Tywin's lip curled faintly. Of course not. Nor should he. Robert would have had you killed, had he known. Joffrey is Robert's heir in the eyes of the law, if not in blood, and we support him as the Lannister seat of power. But you will keep your silence. Should you betray me, you will find that I can be as merciless as any Targaryen dragon. No. Jon felt his throat go dry. "I won't betray you." Tywin nodded. "Satisfied. Good. And do not be foolish enough to believe you have a claim to the Iron Throne. That line ended with your father's death. Even the exiled Viserys and Daenerys are scrabbling in Essos. You are a lion, not a dragon. Do you understand?" "Not." Jon swallowed hard. So many thoughts fought for supremacy in his mind. Anger that Tywin had concealed this from him, shock that he was the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, and a strange swirl of pride and fear that he carried Targaryen blood. But he owed everything to Tywin Lannister, the man who raised him, shaped him, and protected him. "I understand, my lord." Tywin laid a hand on Jon's shoulder, a rare gesture of warmth, or what passed for warmth in Tywin's case. "Good. Now go. Prepare for tomorrow's march. We move at first light." Now. Jon stumbled out of the command tent, consumed by a whirlwind of confusion and revelation. He was a Targaryen. The realization churned within him like a caged dragon. Yet he was also a Lannister, by upbringing, by name, by the code he had lived by his entire life. How could he reconcile these two truths? That night, sleep eluded him. He paced beneath the stars, hearing the snores of soldiers in their tents. The embers of campfires glowed in the dark. He remembered the tapestry in the Red Keep, the flicker of kinship he felt with the dragons. He felt the ghost of Ned Stark in his mind, the man who had sacrificed so much to keep him alive. Jon's heart warred with itself. He recalled the face of Robb Stark on the battlefield. They were cousins then, in truth. Yet here he was, fighting against the Starks. The cruelty of it made him want to scream. But Tywin's hold was iron. Jon owed him, did he not? Tywin had shielded him from Robert's wrath, had shaped him into someone capable. The man had shown Jon the path to power. And power was what Jon needed if he hoped to survive in this vicious realm. He forced himself to set aside doubts. He would remain loyal to Tywin. There was no other choice. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months of campaigning. Tywin maneuvered, forging alliances, outsmarting his enemies. The Starks continued to harry the Lannisters in the Riverlands. The Tyrells, after Renly's death, had allied with Joffrey. Stannis was defeated at the Blackwater. Tyrion's cunning had saved King's Landing. All the while, Jon fought for House Lannister, each clash a step further from the innocence of youth. He was no monster. He strove to minimize harm to common folk, and he did not partake in pillaging like some Lannister bannermen. But he was part of the war machine, and blood was on his hands. In time, the tides turned again. A secret wedding between King Joffrey and Margaery Tyrell shored up Lannister Tyrell power. The North was in turmoil. Robb Stark had been betrayed at the Twins, murdered at the Red Wedding orchestrated by Walder Frey and Roose Bolton with Tywin Lannister's approval. When Jon heard the news, something inside him shattered. Robb Stark, his cousin by blood, had been slaughtered at a wedding feast. Lady Catelyn too had perished if reports were correct. The brutality of it sickened Jon. He confronted Tywin only once, his voice barely above a whisper. "You planned that?" Tywin's face was devoid of remorse. "I ended the war." Jon felt the bile rise in his throat. "But the way it was done, there is no honor in that." Tywin stared at him coldly. "Honor does not feed armies, nor does it secure peace. The realm will know stability because the Northern Rebellion died swiftly. Now Winterfell belongs to Bolton, who bends the knee to the Iron Throne. Our position is stronger than ever." "Nadin." Jon bowed his head, fists clenched. He wanted to protest, to declare it monstrous, but the weight of Tywin's authority crushed him. "Yes, my lord." Even as dread settled in him, Jon realized he was at a crossroads. The more he witnessed of Tywin's ruthlessness, the more he sensed a darkness creeping into himself. If he continued down this path, he might one day commit acts as vile as the Red Wedding. But if he turned against Tywin, what future could he possibly have? Could he declare himself a Targaryen, ally with Stannis, or some other claimant? That seemed madness. The Lannisters held all the power, and Tywin had an unbreakable grip on him. Months passed. The war died down, though pockets of resistance remained. Tywin returned to King's Landing in triumph. Jon accompanied him, wearing the lion surcoat. The capital bristled with rumors and tensions. King Joffrey's cruelty was whispered of in every alley. The small folk cursed the Lannisters for the war's devastation, but outwardly they cheered the new alliance with the Tyrells. At court, Jon was introduced officially as Lord Tywin's ward and a future envoy of House Lannister. He dined with the king, noticing Joffrey's petulant sneer and the way he seemed to revel in the memory of Ned Stark's execution. It churned Jon's stomach. Queen Cersei watched him with a feline scrutiny, while Margaery Tyrell offered a polite smile. Tyrion, serving as master of coin, gave Jon a weary nod, as though apologizing for the spectacle. Then came the purple wedding, the lavish ceremony to celebrate Joffrey and Margaery's nuptials. Jon stood to one side, resplendent in Lannister finery, yet his mind reeled at the extravagance and the underlying tension. Joffrey tormented Tyrion with humiliating tasks, sneered at Sansa Stark, another cousin of Jon's, he realized, though she did not know it, and guffawed at cruel jokes. Jon's heart pounded as he watched Joffrey swirl wine in his golden goblet. The memory of the Red Wedding haunted him, and the spectacle of dwarfs reenacting the war made him sick. Then, in a sudden turn of fate, Joffrey began to choke. Poison. Chaos erupted. Joffrey died in his mother's arms, and Tyrion was seized for regicide. In the turmoil that followed, Jon found himself torn yet again. The Lannisters believed Tyrion had killed the king. Cersei demanded vengeance. Tywin quietly moved to ensure a trial would occur. Jon did not believe Tyrion guilty, but he had no proof. As the investigation unfolded, Tywin summoned Jon to his solar in the Red Keep. "We must remain united," Tywin said curtly. "Tyrion's fate is unfortunate, but we cannot allow sentiment to weaken us. If the evidence condemns him, so be it." Jon swallowed. "But he is your son." Tywin's gaze was flint. "And you are my ward. You owe me your loyalty. Do not forget all I have done for you." Jon's throat constricted. He remembered the saving grace Tywin had offered him as a baby. The years of training, the sword, the name, the knowledge of his parentage. "I am loyal, my lord." Tywin nodded. "Good. When Tyrion is tried, you will bear witness to the proceedings. Observe carefully. If there is a chance to salvage him without jeopardizing our family's power, I will take it. But we must be prepared for the worst." The worst came swiftly. The trial was a mockery of justice, as Cersei paraded false witnesses and twisted accounts. Jon could do nothing but watch in silent horror. Shae, Tyrion's lover, betrayed him in open court. Tyrion demanded a trial by combat. He lost, and the sentence was death. But that night, Tyrion escaped with Jaime's help, leaving chaos in his wake. The next morning, Tywin was found slain on the privy, shot with a crossbow by none other than Tyrion himself. Jon was in his quarters when the news reached him. His world tilted on its axis. Tywin Lannister was dead. The man who had raised him, taught him, shaped him, and yes, manipulated him, was gone in an instant. Jon rushed to the Tower of the Hand where Tywin's body had been moved. It was too late. He found the hall guarded, the corridors thick with Lannister soldiers, their faces pallid. Inside, Tywin's corpse lay on a table, a cloth draped over his torso. The bolt wounds glistened red. Jon stared at the still form, the face that had once seemed so carved from stone, now slack in death. He felt an inexplicable mixture of grief and liberation. Tywin's final words to him echoed in his mind, "You owe me your loyalty." The man who had been his father in all but blood, who had raised him as a lion, was gone. In the swirl of shock, Cersei ascended to power, naming herself Queen Regent to the boy King Tommen. She regarded Jon with suspicion. He had been Tywin's project after all. Jaime seemed lost in his own guilt, dealing with the aftermath of Tyrion's betrayal. Kevin Lannister took over some responsibilities, but the unspoken question lingered. What of Jon? Days stretched into weeks. The funeral of Tywin Lannister took place in the Great Septi, with thousands of mourners, many forced or bribed. Jon stood near the front, a black cloak over his Lannister finery, watching the pyre. He sensed stares on him, whispered questions. Would Tywin's ward remain in favor or be cast aside? In the midst of that uncertain swirl, an unexpected letter arrived from the wall. It bore the seal of the Night's Watch. Word had reached the realm that the wildlings were gathering in unprecedented numbers, that White Walkers were rumored to stir beyond the wall. To Jon, it sounded like a half-remembered nightmare. But in that moment of uncertainty, with Tywin's shadow gone, Jon felt a pull toward the north he had never truly known. He was of Targaryen blood, but also Stark blood. Ned Stark had died to protect him. The father who raised him, the father who truly shaped his life, was now gone. What path did he have? One evening, standing alone on a balcony overlooking the Blackwater Bay, Jon closed his eyes and remembered the childhood nights at Casterly Rock, the sea winds howling. He recalled the tapestry of dragons, the hush of war councils, the ghost of Robb Stark on the battlefield. He felt fractured, as though he belonged to no one. Then, in a quiet certainty, he decided, he would leave King's Landing. He would go north. Tywin was dead. The Lannister cause was in disarray, with Cersei's paranoia growing by the day, and the Tyrells jockeying for control. Jon had no place here anymore. He might seek out the Night's Watch, the order that asked no questions of parentage. A part of him longed to see the land of his mother's kin, to stand beneath a weirwood, to breathe cold air that smelled of pine. Yet the revelations hammered at him. He was Rhaegar's son, a Targaryen. Did he not have some grander destiny? The realm was torn. Dragons were rumored to exist again across the sea, with Daenerys Targaryen leading freed slaves in Slaver's Bay. But Jon felt no pull toward that far-off sister he had never met. He felt only the memory of Ned Stark, the sorrow of the North. Perhaps his path lay there, among the Black Brothers. So, in a dark hush before dawn, Jon packed his sword, donned simple leathers, and crept from his chambers. The Red Keep slept fitfully, guards distracted by the city's turmoil. He slipped through postern gates, stealing a horse from the stables. He had a purse of coins, enough to sustain him on the road. He left behind the golden lion cloak, the shining Lannister insignia. The only memento he carried was the sword Tywin had given him, carefully wrapped, for he could not entirely cast aside the legacy of the man who had raised him. He rode into the night, the muddy roads of King's Landing stretching before him, uncertain but free for the first time in his life. Dawn found him on the King's Road, heading north. The morning light broke across the horizon, chasing away the last shadows of the night. A breeze rustled his hair, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and distant forests. As he rode, he allowed himself to think of the father he had lost, the father he never knew, and the mother he only heard tales of. He thought of the roars of lions and the silent flight of dragons. Above all, he wondered whether the gods, be they old or new, had charted a strange path for him. A Lannister raised, a Targaryen by blood, a Stark by mother's line. A puzzle, a chimera. Perhaps he would always be a man of two worlds, or three. But for now, he rode on, toward the land of winter, a place that called to the part of him that had lain dormant under Tywin Lannister's watchful eyes. The war in the south would continue to rage, Cersei would continue her vicious games, the Tyrells would vie for influence, and Tyrion, somewhere across the narrow sea, would spin new schemes. But Jon did not look back. The north beckoned, and maybe in the howling winds of that cold land, he might finally find the truth of who he was, beyond the name Tywin had given him and the secrets that had bound him since birth. In the weeks that followed, each day carried him farther from the capital and deeper into the unknown. He rode past burned villages, through fields once ravaged by armies, across the stone bridge at the Trident where Robert had slain Rhaegar. Jon paused there for a time, dismounting to gaze at the water rushing over rocks. He knelt, pressing a hand to the ground. Here, his father, Rhaegar Targaryen, had died. Had the man been a monster or a tragic prince? Jon had only conflicting songs and stories to guide him, none of which felt fully true. He bent his head, whispering a silent farewell to a father he never knew, then rose and continued north. Farther up the King's Road, he passed the ruins of Harrenhal, that cursed fortress where he had once strategized with Tywin. The blackened towers loomed like a warning. He spurred his horse onward. He avoided the major cities and castles, for fear that word of a dark-haired Lannister might reach Cersei's ears. Once or twice, he encountered bandits on the roads, but his blade and his skill saw him safe. News of the War of the Five Kings was still prevalent, though Joffrey's death had led to Tommen's gentler reign. Yet in the taverns, Jon heard people speaking of more ominous threats. The North is battered, but the Boltons rule from Winterfell now. They flay their enemies. The Ironborn have taken Moat Cailin. Wildlings prowl near the wall, and that's not the worst of it. Some say the dead walk. Grim speculation, but it fueled Jon's determination. He would go to the wall. He would find a new purpose. Tywin Lannister had groomed him for a destiny of power. But in the end, the old lion had been slain by his own son, and the empire he built teetered on the edge of chaos. Now Jon would carve his own path, a path free from the manipulations of the southern courts. At last, after endless days of travel, Jon crossed into the north. The air turned colder, the forest denser, and he felt an inexplicable comfort in the stark majesty of the land. Despite everything, he was part Stark, and the land seemed to welcome him. He passed tumble-down villages, glimpsed the vast emptiness of the tundra, and watched snow begin to drift from slate-gray skies. Strangely, it felt like coming home to a place he had never seen. He reached the wall, that massive barrier of ice rising like a silent testament to an ancient war. The Black brothers at Castle Black eyed him warily when he approached, for he wore no sigils, only battered leathers and a longsword of fine make. He dismounted and announced he wished to take the Black. They asked his name. For a moment, he hesitated. He could say Jon Snow, the name Ned Stark had once given him. He could say Jon Lannister, the name Tywin had bestowed. He could even lay claim to Jon Targaryen. But in the end, he said quietly, "I am Jon Snow." That was the name the realm would know him by? Bastard of the North? Or so they might think. It was simpler that way. With that admission, he was welcomed, if grudgingly, into their ranks. He soon learned of the wildling threat, of the king beyond the wall, Mance Rayder. Rumors of White Walkers grew more frequent among the Black brothers. Winter was coming, and with it, horrors beyond imagining. Jon threw himself into the training, surprising the men with his skill. Though they teased him for his southern courtesy, they quickly realized he was no green boy with a blade. In quiet moments, Jon looked up at the wall's immense height, the ice glimmering under sun or moon. He felt smaller than he'd ever felt beneath the towering corridors of Casterly rock. And yet he felt more at peace. For the first time, he was free from the manipulations of the Game of Thrones. He owed no fealty to Cersei, Tyrion, or any Lannister. He was no one's heir, no one's pawn. He was simply Jon, wearing black, ready to protect the realm from threats beyond the wall. When asked why he'd come, he only said, "I had nowhere else to go." That was true in part. But more deeply, he knew that this place, harsh and lonely, spoke to something in his blood. Something that came from Lyanna Stark, the mother he never knew, and from the realm that had shaped her. If ever the day came that his Targaryen heritage meant something, it would be on his own terms, not as Tywin Lannister's tool. So he settled into the Night's Watch, forging hesitant friendships, keeping his secrets locked away. Outside, the winds howled, carrying the promise of ghosts. Far to the south, the Game of Thrones continued. But for Jon, that game was over. He was a man of the Night's Watch now, a watcher on the walls. In the darkness, as the others slept, Jon sometimes unsheathed the longsword Tywin had given him and stared at the lion's head pommel. He remembered the cold stare of the man who raised him, the father who taught him to be strong. He whispered a silent farewell, not only to Tywin Lannister but to the illusions of who he was supposed to be. Then he raised the blade, letting the meager torchlight dance across its steel, and slid it carefully back into the scabbard. For all the shaping Tywin had done, Jon now walked a different path, one that might save the realm in ways Tywin never would have imagined, standing in vigil against the creeping darkness beyond the wall. And so the lion's cub, with dragon's blood and the wolf's cry echoing in his heart, found new purpose under the endless northern sky. He was no lord, no pretender to the throne, but a guardian of the realms of men. Perhaps that was fate's final twist. Tywin Lannister had raised him to rule, but the mother's legacy called him to defend. In time, all of Westeros might learn the name Jon Snow, the man who gave up the gilded illusions of a southern court to take a vow as old as the wall itself. If they ever learned the truth of his lineage, it would be on his terms, at his moment. Until then, the wind howled, and the night was dark, and Jon Snow, once groomed as a Lannister heir, stood tall with the Black brothers, ready to face whatever terrors the dawn might bring. Jon rose before the sun each day. He would stand beneath the wall's vast shadow and watch the sky turn from coal black to that faint purplish glimmer of dawn. The chill of the ice radiated through him, colder than the breezes off the sunset sea at Casterly Rock, colder even than the most frigid nights on campaign in the Riverlands. When the first spears of sunlight finally pierced the gloom, the ice would glow with a crystalline beauty he had never imagined. In those moments, Jon remembered the polished marble halls of the rock, the golden lions carved everywhere. How opulent they had seemed. How small it all felt now, compared to the silent grandeur of this ancient barrier. It was nearing the end of his first month as a brother of the Night's Watch. With each passing day, he found himself more at ease with the order's routines. The early musters in the courtyard, the chores shared by all, the communal meals of bread and stew, and the nightly assignment of sentry posts along the wall's high walkway. The men of the watch were a motley assembly. Murderers, poachers, debtors, bastards, second sons, even some highborn who had chosen the black. There was a harsh camaraderie among them. More than once, Jon caught a man eyeing the fine steel of his longsword with undisguised envy, but no one dared touch it. The sword was too obviously well crafted, castle forged, with the lion pommel that might still pass for an ornamental beast, though any discerning eye could see the style was pure Lannister. Jon had told the watch recruiters his name was Jon Snow, implying that he was a bastard of the North. None had asked further questions. If they suspected something amiss, they were too busy with the pressing needs of the realm's northern frontier to pry. A few teased him for looking so refined. A bastard lordling, they joked, but mostly without malice. Jon let them talk. He knew that on the battlefield or the training yard, respect was earned by deed, not by any name. He fell in with a small knot of new recruits. There was Denys, a wiry man from the Vale who had gambled away his inheritance and fled to the watch rather than face the headsman's axe for his debts. Rafe, a big-boned lad from the Crownlands, whose father had forced him to take the black after he impregnated a farmer's daughter. And Orvin, an older fellow with salt and pepper hair, rumored to have been an outlaw in the Riverlands. Jon had no illusions that these were righteous men, but within the cold familiarity of Castle Black, they shared a certain easy acceptance of one another's sins. No matter the crimes or misfortunes that had led them there, each man wore the same black cloak, ate the same thin broth, shared the same cramped barracks. More than once, Jon found himself feeling safer in their company than he'd ever felt at Tywin Lannister's side. Sometimes, late at night in the common room, the men would swap stories, tall tales about the things they'd done or the legends they'd heard of the far north. Ghosts in the ice, white shadows in the forest, giants and wights, and other nonsense. But the older Black brothers, those who had journeyed beyond the wall, would stare into the fire with troubled eyes. They might not say a word, yet their silence was statement enough. Something was stirring in the wilderness. They all felt it. Jon tried to keep his own counsel. He had enough secrets to choke a wyvern. He had told no one about Tywin Lannister, or his Targaryen blood, or his earliest memories in the gilded halls of Casterly Rock. He wore the black now. It freed him from the politics of the South, or so he had hoped. Yet the realm's troubles did not simply vanish because he had slipped away. The War of the Five Kings might be dying down, but new tensions brewed every day. Stannis Baratheon was rumored to have fled to Dragonstone with a battered army. Tommen now sat the Iron Throne, overshadowed by Cersei's regency. The North was ravaged, under the heel of the Boltons who had betrayed the Starks. The Ironborn reaved up and down the coasts. And across the narrow sea, whispered word said that Daenerys Targaryen had indeed hatched 3 dragons and now cut a swath through the slavers of Essos. Jon told himself none of it mattered. His duty was here, on the wall. Yet at times, alone with his thoughts, he could not help but wonder if his half-aunt, this Daenerys, would one day set sail to reclaim her birthright. And if so, what would Jon do, if anything? He shoved the question aside each time. He had pledged his life to the Night's Watch. Their vows were simple, stark, absolute. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. One crisp morning, as he was drilling with a wooden sword alongside Denys and Rafe, a horn call echoed across the courtyard. One blast. A visitor approaching from the south. The men paused in their training, glancing toward the gate. Men of the watch rarely had many visitors, but in these times anything was possible. They gathered around the yard's perimeter as the gate was unbarred. A group of riders in furs and cloaks approached, carrying the sigil of House Bolton. A flayed man, pink on red. Jon felt a chill, different from the cold of the north. The Boltons. He had never met them, but he knew well enough that Tywin had struck a deal with Roose Bolton to orchestrate the Red Wedding. The Boltons had effectively taken the Stark seat at Winterfell. Brutality was in their reputation, skinning enemies, punishing vassals, sowing terror. Jon's memories of hearing it from Lannister soldiers still made his stomach lurch. At the head of these riders was a lean man with pallid skin and eyes like chips of dirty ice. Lord Roose Bolton himself. He dismounted smoothly, ignoring the wary stares of the brothers. Beside him, a younger man with a sneer on his lips cast a gaze around the courtyard. That must be Ramsay Snow, now Ramsay Bolton, if rumor was true that Roose had him legitimized. The watchmen parted to let them pass. Sir Eliezer Thorne, the master-at-arms of the Night's Watch, strode forward to greet them with a stiff bow. "Lord Bolton," he said, "what brings you to Castle Black?" Bolton's voice was as measured and quiet as a scalpel blade. "Matters of the North are my concern, and the Night's Watch stands in the North," he said evenly, looking around. "We come to speak with your Lord Commander." Thorne's mouth twisted. That would be Lord Commander Jorah Mormont. May the gods rest his soul. He was slain beyond the wall by mutineers. Thorne paused. "We have yet to elect a new commander." A faint shadow of a smile crossed Bolton's face. "How unfortunate. Then I shall address your senior officers and see if they will indulge a request from the Warden of the North." Murmurs rippled through the watching Black brothers. Roose Bolton had claimed the title Warden of the North after siding with the Iron Throne and delivering the Starks to slaughter. Yet the authority behind that title was real. The Watch had always vowed neutrality in the wars of the realm, but they still depended on the great lords for supplies and support. Thorne gave a curt nod. "Follow me to the common hall. We can speak there." As the Bolton party strode through the yard, Ramsay's gaze swept over the watchers, pausing on Jon. Their eyes met. Jon felt a prickling on the back of his neck. Ramsay's stare was the look of a predator sizing up prey. Curiosity, sadism, something else. But then he turned away and followed his father. Jon exhaled, forcing himself to remain calm. Perhaps the Boltons would leave quickly, and yet a creeping dread told him that their arrival would not be so simple. Roose Bolton was cunning, and Ramsay was rumored to be cruel beyond measure. If they had come to parley with the Night's Watch, it likely meant the Boltons were shoring up power, or sniffing out threats. After a subdued midday meal, Jon found himself assigned to guard duty in the outer corridors, just off the common hall where the Boltons and the Watch's officers were meeting. He held a spear, more ceremonial than practical, but still a lethal piece of steel. Through the thick oak door, he heard murmured voices, the rise and fall of men in debate. Now and then, sharper words carried. Jon listened, gleaning fragments. Wildlings have gathered in unprecedented numbers. The false king beyond the wall was last seen. Winterfell needs more men to secure the region. The Watch's resources are already stretched thin. Then Bolton's voice, measured and mild. "Surely if the Watch wishes to maintain the safety of the realm, you might see the wisdom of a cooperative stance." Jon grimaced. The meaning was clear enough. Bolton was probably angling to use the Watch as an extension of his own power, or at least press them into supporting his authority in the North. But the Watch was sworn to serve no lord, only to defend the realm from the threats beyond the wall. If that principle eroded, the consequences would be dire. Just as Jon was pondering, the door opened, and a sour-faced Thorne emerged, glancing around with a scowl. He beckoned to Jon. "You, Snow, come." Jon obeyed, following Thorne into the common hall. A long table stood at the center, scattered with maps. A few senior Black brothers were present, Bowen Marsh, Othel Yarwick, others who made up the de facto leadership since Mormont's death. Opposite them sat Roose Bolton and Ramsay, accompanied by a pair of Bolton men-at-arms. The air was thick with tension. Thorne cleared his throat. "You asked for demonstration of our men's readiness, Lord Bolton." He gestured to Jon. "Snow, here is among our best new recruits, skilled with a blade." Bolton regarded Jon with a bored expression. "Indeed. I was only curious to see if the Watch is as undermanned and ill-trained as rumor suggests." His pale gaze flicked over Jon's black cloak, then the sword at his side. "This one does not look so ill-trained." Jon kept his composure, offering a slight bow, though he did not avert his eyes. "My lord." Ramsay leaned forward, a smirk twisting his lips. Snow? Is it? I have that name myself, or did once. He glanced at his father, who made no comment. Where in the north do you hail from, brother? Something in Ramsay's tone made the word brother sound like a taunt. Jon kept his face neutral. A small holdfast, my lord, near the western mountains. The lie rolled off his tongue easily. The last thing he wanted was for them to suspect his link to the Lannisters. Ramsay's eyes glittered. Is that so? Never heard of it. Jon gave a shrug. Few have. It was a poor place. Ramsay stared at him a moment longer, then snorted softly. I see. Well, father, if the Night's Watch can spare such a swordsman, perhaps they can be convinced to lend a few men to bolster Winterfell's garrison. We hear talk of wildlings crossing the Gift in small bands. Bolton's voice was still mild. A trifling matter. But with winter approaching, the small folk need reassurance that we stand guard. Now, Bowen Marsh bristled. The Watch does not get involved in the squabbles of the realm, Lord Bolton. Our mission is to defend the wall. Of course, Bolton said, expression placid. Yet the Starks often aided the Watch in times past. We only seek cooperation in that spirit. Thorne folded his arms. The Starks were different from what we have now. He clearly bit back a more pointed insult, though Bolton's face betrayed no offense. We are low on men ourselves. And the wildlings, well, it seems they have scattered since the death of Mansraider at the Battle of the Wall. But we remain vigilant. Night. Roose Bolton steepled his fingers. Vigilance is admirable. Still, the realm's troubles extend beyond the wall, do they not? Your oath is to protect Westeros from threats outside or within, is it not? A slight lift of his eyebrow. Our vow is to hold the wall, Thorne said. To act as the shield that guards the realms of men. His tone grew firmer. We do not take orders from the Warden of the North, my lord. We have but one calling. That is he. For a beat, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Ramsay's sneer faded, replaced by a calculating stare. Finally, Roose Bolton inclined his head. Of course, he murmured. We would not dream of suborning your oath. Forgive my impertinence. Let us say no more on the matter. Thorne seemed relieved, though not entirely trusting. Very well. At that, Bolton rose, adjusting his cloak of fine fur. Ramsay followed, regarding Jon with a final, narrow glance. Then they departed, their men behind them. Thorne exhaled. Bowen Marsh muttered curses under his breath. The room seemed to vibrate with unspent tension. After a moment, Thorne waved Jon away. Jon retreated to the courtyard in time to see the Bolton party mounting their horses, preparing to depart. He paused near the stables, watching as Ramsay swung into the saddle. The pale young man glanced around and spied Jon, lurking in the shadows. Their eyes met again. Ramsay's lip curled as if in amusement. Then he spurred his horse and followed his father out the gate. In that fleeting moment, Jon had felt a wave of loathing wash over him, not unlike the revulsion he'd felt toward Joffrey Baratheon at King's Landing. There was something rotten in Ramsay Bolton. Something that reminded Jon too well of the cruelty he had witnessed in Lannister ranks, but grown even more depraved. When the riders vanished into the south, Castle Black exhaled collectively. Men returned to their chores and duties. But all day, Jon couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this was not the end of House Bolton's meddling in the north. If anything, it was only the beginning. Davsum stay. That night, Jon found himself on watch duty atop the wall. The climb up took his breath away, as it always did, the wooden lift creaking and groaning as it ascended the sheer face of ice. When he stepped onto the top, the wind nearly tore the cloak from his body. The blackness stretched all around, broken only by the glimmer of stars and the faint glow of lanterns from below. It was like standing at the edge of the world. He pulled his cloak tighter and moved along the wooden walkway, meeting the other watchers on duty. They greeted him with tired nods. The watch was quiet, as always, broken by the occasional gossip or jest. But soon, the men fell silent, each lost in his thoughts. Jon found a vantage point near one of the fire braziers. The flames danced, struggling to stay alight in the bitter wind. He gazed northward. Beyond the wall lay a vast darkness, dense forests, frozen wastes, mountains lost to rumor. The wildlings had retreated after their failed siege, or so the report said. Yet something else lurked out there, something older than any clan of free folk. Jon recalled the stories old Nan used to tell, though he had only ever heard them second-hand from servants at Casterly Rock, who had once lived in the north. The White Walkers or the others, ancient beings who brought with them an endless night. He'd always dismissed them as children's tales. But the Night's Watch took such tales seriously indeed. He was no longer certain what was real or myth. After seeing the way war had turned men into monsters, Jon almost believed anything was possible. He breathed out, watching the plume of his breath vanish into the air. Then he closed his eyes, hearing the faint whistle of the wind. In that hush, he thought of Tywin Lannister. It felt so strange to have once believed that man to be the mightiest figure in the world, the unmoving axis around which everything revolved. Now Tywin was dead, shot through the bowels by his own son. That tower of strength toppled by a single bolt. The memory weighed on Jon, an odd mixture of grief and relief. The old lion's shadow still clung to him, even here at the top of the wall. And then there was the knowledge. He was Rhaegar Targaryen's son, and the son of Lyanna Stark. That heritage made him an heir to two once great families. Yet he had forsworn any claim, for he wore the black now. Even so, a flicker of possibility haunted him. If Daenerys Targaryen truly commanded dragons, if one day she landed in Westeros as a conqueror, would she seek out any kin she had left? Would that kinship matter to her or to him? He reminded himself again. The Watch was his life now. He was bound by vows. He was no lord, no prince. Let the Targaryen or Lannister games continue without him. They felt a world away from the silent vigilance atop the wall. Days passed into weeks. Patrols beyond the wall became more frequent. Commander Mormont's successor had yet to be chosen. The senior officers were mired in disputes over who should lead. Sir Eliezer Thorne wanted the position, and he had the backing of some men. Bowen Marsh was also a contender, as the first steward. Othel Yarwick, the first builder, had his supporters too. The Watch's hierarchy was in flux, and tensions simmered. Jon tried to keep his head down. He was too new to cast a vote in the choosing, but the rancors spilled into the training yard and the barracks. Men bickered over which candidate would preserve tradition, which might be best at rallying supplies from the lords of the north, which might bend the Watch's neutrality too far. The stalemate dragged on, fueling uncertainty. Meanwhile, shipments from the south trickled in irregularly. The Boltons, so newly elevated, did send some meager supplies, salted meats, ale grain. But the shipments always arrived with some petty insinuation that the Watch owed them gratitude, if not outright field. Most of the men resented it. The Karstarks and Umbers were in disarray. The Manderleys, last any Raven had heard, were beset by Ironborn raids. The north was a patchwork of ruin, recovering from the wars and the betrayal at the Twins. No one had enough to spare. One bitterly cold afternoon, a patrol returned from beyond the wall with news. Scattered wildling bands roamed the haunted forest. They'd spotted men cowering in hidden camps, half-starved, uncertain whether to fight or flee. The Watchers also claimed to have seen strange shapes after nightfall, odd lights in the trees. They'd found no bodies or whites, but the men's unease was palpable. The sense that something was stirring beyond the wall had grown sharper. Despite that, the Watch did not have the manpower for a large-scale expedition. They sent out small parties to scout, glean information, offer refuge if any wildlings wanted to surrender peacefully. The free folk seldom trusted crows, but after Mance Raider's defeat, some wildlings might prefer a black cloak's mercy to the Boltons' cruelty. Jon volunteered for one such patrol. He felt compelled to see what lay beyond the wall, to confront the mysteries that lurked there. Perhaps, too, he hoped it would silence the roiling uncertainties within him. A mission in the dark wilderness might test his mettle in a way no southern war ever had. Sir Alizer eyed him skeptically when he stepped forward. "You, Snow," he said, glancing down at a list of names. "You're green as summer grass up here." Jon stiffened. "I've seen battle, my lord, more than a few times." Thorne's lip curled in scorn. In the south, wearing a lion's colors, I'll wager. The north is different, boy. But if you're so eager, I won't stop you." He made a note. "Very well. Report to the stables at dawn. You'll ride with Daniel, Rafe, Orvin, and Sir Hakon. Keep your eyes open, or you'll lose that pretty sword to a wildling's axe. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Jon said. He left the armory feeling a mix of nerves and resolve. That night, he barely slept. In the darkness of the barracks, he lay awake, thinking of the swirling snow that awaited them beyond the gate. He thought back to the countless times he'd drilled with knights in golden surcoats, learned battlefield tactics from Tywin stewards and war masters, all to serve the Lannisters. Now, ironically, he'd be using every scrap of that training to keep himself and his brothers alive in a place Tywin had probably never set foot. The old lion would have scoffed at such a notion, or considered it a waste. But Tywin was no longer the measure of Jon's destiny. The vow of the Night's Watch was all the measure he needed now. When dawnlight tinted the sky, Jon joined the small group at the stables. Daniel was a rangy ranger with a scar across his cheek, the most experienced among them and ranging beyond the wall. Rafe was the same big-boned young man who had come up from the Crownlands with Jon. Orvin was the gray-haired ex-outlaw, quiet but capable with a bow. Sir Hakon, short and stout with a gruff manner, led the party. They readied their garrons, small, hardy horses bred for the cold, and took on provisions. Furs, cloaks, flint, and tinder, a few salted rations. Each man carried a weapon. Hakon a longsword and dagger, Daniel a curved huntsman's bow, Orvin a more standard shortbow, Rafe a spear, Jon his lion-pommeled sword. The great gate through the wall opened with laborious creaks, revealing a tunnel of ice that seemed to stretch to the heart of winter itself. They filed through, torches lighting the path, and emerged on the far side to a wilderness of snow-laden trees and rolling drifts. The wind was sharper here, stinging their faces. Jon had braced himself for the cold, yet it still hit him like a physical force. "Keep your eyes peeled," Sir Hakon grumbled. "We'll ride north by the western route. We've got word of a small band near the foothills that might be open to surrendering. Then we'll curve east and see if we can sniff out any sign of whites or worse." The men nodded. Daniel took point, guiding them along faint trails in the deep snow. Jon rode in the middle of the group, scanning the thick pines, their branches bowed under the weight of snow. All was silent, save for the crunch of hooves and the rustle of wind. His breath plumed before him, and the world felt hushed, as though every living creature was holding its breath in the presence of an ancient secret. They rode for hours. Twice they paused to rest the garrons and warm themselves with a swig of ale. Daniel and Orvin, more accustomed to these rangings, made quiet small talk, remarking on the changed landscape after the wildling assault months before. The free folk had retreated, but signs of their passage remained. Campsites burned, felled trees, old footprints turned to ice patches. Jon noticed how Orvin's eyes flicked constantly to the shadows, as if expecting an arrow from behind any trunk. As twilight fell, they found an overhang of rock where they could make camp, shielded from the brunt of the wind. Rafe started a small fire. The flames offered precious warmth and light, but also risked drawing attention. Hakon seemed to think it was safe enough, given how far they'd traveled without seeing a soul. They ate salted pork and hard bread, passing a skin of watered wine among them. Jon pulled his cloak tight around him, close to the fire. The cold sank into his bones, more unrelenting than any winter he'd known in the south. Occasionally, he thought he heard something. A faint crackle, like footsteps in the distance, but each time the others heard nothing. "Wind," they insisted. "Just the wind." As darkness deepened, the men settled to sleep in turns, each taking a watch. Jon volunteered for the first watch, staring into the flickering glow of the fire and the shadows beyond. The pine branches shifted in the breeze, scraping together with soft, eerie noises. Overhead, the sky was a tapestry of stars, clearer than anything he had seen near the smoke of King's Landing or the sea mists of Casterly Rock. The vastness made him feel small. He remembered the hunts from his younger days, riding with Tywin's men or with Jaime, trying to prove himself. Those hunts had been in mild, cultivated fields or carefully managed forests in the Westerlands, where boars and deer were the most dangerous game. This was different. Here, the land itself felt predatory in its raw, untempered silence. Eventually, he woke Sir Håkon for the next watch and curled up in the bedroll. Sleep came in fitful snatches. He dreamt he was a small boy again, running through labyrinthine corridors of red rock, hearing the roar of the sea outside. A voice called his name, Jon, but it wasn't Tywin's voice or Ned Stark's. It was a woman's, distant and full of sorrow. He turned a corner and saw a shining red door with a golden lion's head knocker. When he reached for it, the door transformed into a weirwood face, eyes bleeding sap, whispering words he could not understand. He stumbled back, and dragonfire flared all around him. He woke with a gasp, cold sweat drenching his skin. Pale light of dawn crept through the pines. The embers of the fire smoldered. No one else was stirring yet, so he sat up, breathing deeply to steady himself. The dream's images clung to his mind. A mother's voice he had never truly heard, a weirwood with bloody tears, a swirl of dragon flame. Shivering, he told himself it was only a dream. They resumed their ride. By midday, they reached a slope overlooking a shallow valley. Daniel spotted smoke drifting in the distance, likely a wildling camp. Håkon nodded grimly and led them down, weapons at the ready. The plan was to approach cautiously, see if the wildlings were open to surrender, or at least to conversation. The Watch offered mercy, food and shelter at Castle Black, in exchange for peace. It was better than letting them starve or freeze, or allowing them to slip south where they might be caught by the Boltons. They found a handful of free folk in a hollow. 2 men, a woman, 3 children, and a frail elder. They looked half dead from hunger and cold. Their tents were patched rags, their fire nearly out. Daniel raised a hand in peace. "We're from the Night's Watch," he called. "We mean you no harm, if you do not harm us." One of the men lurched upright, brandishing a spear of sharpened bone. "Crows," he growled. His stance was defiant, though his legs trembled from weakness. Håkon cleared his throat. "Crows, but we offer you survival, food, shelter. Come with us back to the wall, or stay and freeze, your choice." The free folk eyed them with distrust. But the woman cast a glance at the children, who looked close to collapse. They had little choice. "We'll come," she said, voice rough. "Swear you won't kill us." Håkon shrugged. "No interest in killing. We'll bring you to Castle Black. Let the Lord Steward decide your fate. At least you'll have a roof over your head and a meal in your belly." The group gathered their meager belongings. Jon dismounted and gave the children a share of his water, which they gulped down greedily. He felt a pang of pity. War and winter had driven these folk to such desperation. He wondered how many thousands more were out there, scattered and lost. They set off back south, traveling slowly because of the children and the elder. Jon walked alongside them, leading his horse so they could rest on its back one at a time. The 2 wildling men remained wary, clutching their improvised weapons, but they seemed too exhausted to fight. That night, their camp was tense. The free folk huddled on one side of the fire, the crows on the other. But no violence broke out. None had the strength or desire. The next day passed in a slog. By dusk, they were nearing the southern edge of the forest. The wall's looming presence was only a few miles away when the first arrow whizzed overhead. "Down!" Håkon bellowed. Jon flung himself behind a fallen log, instinct honed by countless sparring sessions. Another arrow thudded into a tree trunk with a dull twang. Daniel cursed, stringing his bow. Orvan did the same, scanning the tree line for a glimpse of the attackers. Rafe shielded the children behind him, spear in hand. The wildlings cowered, eyes wide with terror. A shrill cry rose from the shadows, a harsh, ululating whoop. Moments later, half a dozen figures bounded into view, weapons raised. More wildlings, though these looked healthier and more dangerous than the starved band they had just rescued. Their clothes were ragged furs, and they wielded crude axes, spears, and bows. An ambush. "Hold your ground," Hakon roared. He and Jon leaped up to meet the first attackers, swords flashing. Jon parried a spear thrust aimed at his gut, pivoted, and slashed across a wildling's chest. Blood sprayed. Another came at him with an axe, screaming curses. Jon stepped back, deflecting blow after blow. The man was strong, driven by desperation. The thud of steel rang in Jon's ears. At last he found an opening and ran his sword into the man's ribs. Hot blood slicked his blade. He yanked it free, heart pounding. Daniel and Orvin loosed arrows into the attackers, dropping 2 eggs. Hakon was grappling with a tall wildling woman who swung a stone club at his helm. He slammed his sword pommel into her temple, staggering her long enough to shove her aside. Another arrow whistled past. One of the free folk men I'd been escorting, the older, weaker one, took it in the back and collapsed. The rest of that rescued group scattered, ducking behind trees in blind panic. Rafe engaged 2 wildlings at once, desperately fending them off with his spear. He managed to wound one, but the other lunged in, slashing Rafe's arm. Rafe cried out, blood soaking his sleeve. Jon rushed in to help, blocking a wildling's next strike. He thrust his blade deep into the attacker's belly. The wildling coughed blood, eyes wide, then fell. Rafe sank to his knees, clutching his wound. Within moments, the ambushers realized they were outmatched. They had expected an easy kill, perhaps thinking the crows were as weak as the group they were escorting. But Hakon and Jon cut down another, and Daniel's arrow took a third in the throat. The last 2 fled into the trees, spitting curses, leaving their dead and dying behind. Panting, Jon scanned the scene. Orvin was pressing a hand to his shoulder, where an arrow had grazed him. Daniel was unhurt, though shaken. Rafe hissed in pain, and the freed woman was trying to staunch his bleeding with a rag. The wildling child wailed, crouching next to the dead elder who had been struck by the arrow. Hakon swore colorfully, dragging a body off to the side. Gods damn these fools. We're close enough to the wall they could have surrendered, but no. He spat. At least they're gone now. Likely a rogue band, not part of any bigger host. Let's hope so. Jon swallowed, trying to steady the trembling in his limbs. He had killed men before, during the War of the 5 Kings, in Tywin's service. But this was different. It felt more personal, more desperate. He forced himself to breathe. "We need to get Rafe back for proper treatment." Hakon agreed, kneeling next to Rafe. He examined the gash. "Not too deep, but we'll want a maester to look at it." They bound the wound as best they could. The children wept for the elder. The younger of the 2 wildling men cursed the dead ambushers. "They've killed us all," he muttered. "We were just trying to survive." Hakon shook his head. "Nothing for it now. Let's move." They pressed on until the wall loomed overhead, a giant slab of frozen moonlight. The black gate was open for them, and the group stumbled inside, exhausted. Castle Black stirred with alarm at the news of the ambush, but Hakon downplayed the event, saying it was just a small band. They escorted the remaining wildlings to a holding area. The children sobbed quietly, but some of the Black brothers brought them warm blankets and bread. Jon stood by, unsettled. He had never really understood the wildlings before. He'd thought of them as an enemy, or at least a savage. But seeing them so pitiful, so cornered, his perspective shifted. These were simply people, no different from the peasants or small folk in the south, driven to violence by fear and hunger. Before Jon could brood further, Sir Alistair approached, looking at the battered group with a critical eye. "So, another half-dozen mouths to feed, and you lost 1 man out there? 1 wildling you'd claimed for your own?" Hakon's face hardened. "We lost the old man. The rest made it back." Thorne frowned, then looked at Jon. "You're bloodied, Snow." Jon glanced down and realized the front of his cloak and surcoat bore dark stains from the men hen slain. He said quietly. "We were ambushed." Thorne's gaze swept over him, noticing how Jon's knuckles were white around the hilt of his sword. "Well, at least you didn't die. Clean up, then report to the armory tomorrow. You'll need new gear." He pivoted and strode off without another word. Jon exhaled. He felt no sense of triumph, only the grim acceptance of survival. "I'll see Rafe to the maester," he told Hakon. The older knight nodded, clapping Jon's shoulder in gratitude. "That maester and shall." That night, Jon lingered in the courtyard after the chaos settled. Rafe was stable, bandaged up by Maester Mullen, who was far less skilled than a citadel maester, but knew enough to treat common wounds. The rescued wildlings had been given a corner of the courtyard and a shed to sleep in, under guard. The air smelled of smoke and horse dung, and above, the wall's icy face gleamed in the moonlight. Jon was washing blood from his hands at a barrel pump when a voice spoke behind him. "He was an old man, you say?" He turned to see Orvin, the gray-haired ranger who had survived the ambush with them. "Yes," Jon said quietly. "Took an arrow in the back. Didn't even make a sound." "Then—" Orvin nodded, eyes distant. "That's the way of it up here. Any day can be your last, whether you're a crow, a wildling, or a southern king. Death doesn't favor crowns or titles. I've learned that much." Jon dried his hands on a rag. For a moment, he contemplated telling Orvin something of his own past, how he'd once stood at the side of a man who held the greatest power in the land. But what would be the point? Orvin had just said it. Death cares nothing for who you are. Instead, Jon forced a smile. Better to keep our heads down and do our duty." "That men?" Orvin grunted. "Words to live by." He moved off toward the barracks. Jon finished scrubbing the last crusted blood from his fingernails. The water in the barrel was now faintly pink. Even after he let it swirl down the drain, he felt unclean. Yet at the same time, he felt alive. Every nerve in his body tingled. The near brush with death beyond the wall had sharpened his senses. And, in a strange way, it made him realize that here, in this bleak corner of the world, he was forging an identity beyond Tywin's teachings. Every step he took, every fight he survived, made him more certain that he was not simply a reflection of the old lion's will. He was Jon Snow. And if that name once belonged to a lie, he had claimed it now as truth. He turned in for the night, too tired for dreams to trouble him. Now, in the weeks that followed, winter's hold on the north tightened. Snow piled higher at Castle Black. Still, the watch carried on with patrols, training, and the daily struggle for supplies. More wildling bands trickled in, some peacefully, others not. Thorn grumbled constantly about feeding Mance's brats, and the officers grew increasingly divided on how to handle the influx. Bowen Marsh wanted to close the gates entirely, or at least force any surrendering free folk to serve the watch as laborers. Othel Yarwick worried about how to clothe them all. The men felt the tension mounting. Rumors persisted. White walkers sighted in remote corners, entire villages beyond the wall left empty. A few black brothers insisted they'd seen living corpses in the trees, eyes blazing with blue fire. Others laughed it off as fear-mongering. Jon withheld judgment. He remembered enough about whites and walkers to know the old stories might contain a kernel of truth. The night seemed darker, the cold more piercing. It felt as though something terrible brooded in the far north, waiting. Late one evening, after a grueling day of chores and guard duty, Jon was in the library, seeking a moment's respite. The Night's Watch library was smaller than the fabled one in the Red Keep, but it held tomes from centuries of recorded history, details of wildling raids, maps of the North, treatises on the nature of the others. He'd come to appreciate the dusty quiet away from the rough banter of the yard. He was flipping through a leather-bound volume on ancient Targaryen campaigns when he heard footsteps. Samwell Tarly, one of the few steward scholars who remained after Lord Commander Mormont's expedition, entered, carrying a stack of scrolls. Sam was a portly young man with a nervous manner, but good-hearted. He glanced up and saw Jon. "Oh," Sam said, reddening slightly. "Sorry, I didn't know anyone was in here." Jon closed the book. "It's all right, Sam. I was just reading." Sam offered a hesitant smile. Do you mind if I just do some reading myself? I'm trying to catch up on the logs from old Rangers' reports. Jon gestured for him to join. Go on. I could use some company. Sam set his scrolls down on a splintered wooden table. You know, Jon, I've been wanting to thank you. You helped me that day in the yard with Rafe. I'm not much good at tending injuries, so it was good you were there. Jon chuckled lightly. I don't recall doing much but hand him over to Maester Mullen. Sam flushed. Well, still, he said you kept him calm. That's important. He busied himself unrolling a scroll. I'm no good with blood or fighting or, well, anything really. But I can read and write well enough, so they make me help with the records. Jon understood Sam's self-consciousness. Many in the watch scorned him for his cowardice. It's an important job, Sam, Jon said kindly. Men forget that knowledge is as vital as steel. You're the memory of the watch, in a way. Sam blinked, then smiled shyly. Thank you, Jon. That's kind of you to say. They fell into a comfortable silence, each perusing his text by the light of a single tallow candle. Now and then, Sam read a snippet aloud from old ranging reports. Mentions of strange lights in the sky, sightings of giant wolves, or evidence of hidden caves. Some accounts dated back generations. Jon found it strangely hypnotic. The North was vast, layered with secrets older than any Lannister keep or Targaryen dragon. After a while, Sam turned to Jon. That book you were reading, was it about House Targaryen? Jon glanced at the volume's spine, marked with the three-headed dragon. Yes, a history of Aegon's conquest. Just curious, that's all. Sam nodded enthusiastically. I know that one. It has a few interesting details about the battles that you don't find in Maester Gildane's compendium. His voice grew a bit hushed. Do you think Daenerys Targaryen truly has dragons, as the rumors say? Jon tapped his fingers on the cover. I've heard the same. The rumors from across the narrow sea say she has 3D. Sam's eyes glistened with a mixture of awe and worry. Imagine dragons returning to the world. That could change everything. Jon swallowed. He felt a twinge in his chest, remembering Tywin's parted words, that the Targaryen name was a tool to be wielded at his discretion, and that the last Targaryens in Essos were of little consequence. But if Daenerys was raising dragons, perhaps she was no longer inconsequential. Yes, he said softly. It might. For a moment, an uncomfortable question lingered between them. Sam knew Jon as a bastard from the north, but the glances Sam gave the Targaryen text hinted at some curiosity. Yet Sam was too shy to pry directly. Jon appreciated that. He closed the book. We'll see what comes of it. The world is changing, Sam. Even the wall can't keep it out forever. Sam looked away, nodding. Hey, we must be ready. They left it at that, each returning to his reading. But Jon found he couldn't focus on the pages any longer. His mind churned with the possibility that, one day, Daenerys Targaryen might land on these shores with living dragons at her command, claiming the Iron Throne. Would she see the Boltons and Lannisters cast down for what they'd done to the realm? A part of Jon stirred with quiet satisfaction at the thought of the Boltons paying for the Red Wedding. Another part worried about the chaos that would ensue. More war, more blood. And what if Daenerys discovered Jon's Targaryen blood? Would that be a threat to her claim, or a reason to ally with him? He breathed out, forcing the thoughts away. He was a black brother, and his vow was all that mattered. He would stand guard against the terrors of the north, letting the southern crowns fall or rise without him. That was the oath he'd sworn. Then, not a fortnight later, another messenger arrived from Winterfell. This time it wasn't Roose or Ramsay in person, but a Bolton retainer, bearing tidings and demands. The retainer, a thin man with hollow cheeks, delivered a parchment to Bowen Marsh, who in turn read it before the assembled senior officers. Jon wasn't present in that meeting, but word spread quickly through the ranks. Roose Bolton claimed that a pack of wildlings had been raiding holdfasts south of the New Gift, slaying farmers and stealing livestock. He demanded the Night's Watch do more to police the region, or allow Bolton men to garrison near Castle Black to ensure security. It was a naked attempt to insert Bolton influence at the Wall. Sir Leeser was furious, Marsh was flustered, and Yarwick fretted over the potential confrontation. In the end, the officers penned a formal refusal, citing the Night's Watch's neutrality and lack of manpower for what was effectively a southern matter. They would do what they could, but the Boltons would not be allowed to station their flayed man banners in the shadow of the Wall. How long before Bolton grows tired of asking politely? Orvin murmured one evening over a supper of thin stew. He's Warden of the North now, crowned by the Lannisters. Could he just force the issue? A man named Totter snorted. He might. But the Night's Watch has stood for thousands of years, and we've seen kings come and go. Let him try. Jon kept silent, but he recalled the might of Lannister armies. If Bolton truly had the Iron Throne's blessing, a small black-clad order might not deter him. Yet the Watch had certain privileges. Kings, wards, and lords traditionally left it alone. Breaking that taboo could spark unrest. Still, the Boltons were not known for scruples. If they wanted a presence here, they might find a pretense. Sure enough, tensions continued to simmer. A few black brothers who ventured south into the new gift reported being harassed by Bolton soldiers. One man, Kedge White-Eye, came back beaten black and blue, cursing the flayed man's sigil. He claimed the soldiers had called him a traitorous crow who sheltered wildling scum. They threatened to burn out any camps of free folk who approached the Wall. Bowen Marsh was beside himself, trying to keep the peace. But the officers remained leaderless. A new Lord Commander had yet to be chosen. The need for strong leadership was glaringly obvious. Ser Eliezer pushed for more hostility toward the free folk, insisting that if the Boltons saw they were tough on wildlings, the tension might cool. Yarwick insisted on focusing on the real threat beyond the Wall, and worried about straining their already thin resources by picking fights with the Boltons. In the midst of this, men began to whisper about a possible candidate for Lord Commander who wasn't one of the three vying officers. Some turned their eyes to Jon Snow. He had proven himself capable in battle, calm under pressure. He was a newcomer, yes, but his skill and bearing were undeniable. The rumor spread quietly, but it reached Jon's ears eventually. He was in the armory, polishing the lion-pommeled longsword, when Rafe limped over, his arm still in a sling from the ambush wound. Heard the talk? Rafe asked with a half-grin. Jon frowned. Talk of what? Some men say you'd be better than Thorne or Marsh as commander. Jon nearly dropped the rag. May? Don't be ridiculous. Rafe shrugged. You're green, but you fought a real war. Thorne's a spiteful arse. Marsh is old and indecisive. Yarwick's a builder, not a leader. The men see how you handle yourself. Could be they want fresh blood. No mind. Jon stared at his reflection in the steel blade. I'm no leader. That's not what the others say. Think on it. Rafe smirked, then wandered off. Jon set the sword aside, heart pounding. He had never entertained the idea of commanding the Night's Watch. He was newly joined, for the gods' sake. And he had too many secrets. The thought of leading men who had no idea of his true parentage felt dishonest, though that secret no longer mattered, did it? In the Watch, one's past was supposed to be buried. Still, the notion unsettled him. He had fled the South to escape the burden of crowns and claims, only to find himself pushed into a position of power here, at the edge of the world. He tried to dismiss it. But as the days went on, more men subtly voiced their support, or at least their curiosity. Jon realized that, ironically, Tywin Lannister's training had primed him for command. Negotiations, discipline, reading men's motives, these were all second nature to him now. The men saw him as steady, honorable, and battle-tested. Word had spread of his skill in the yard, of how he'd handled that ambush beyond the Wall. He was accessible in a way Thorne was not, and more decisive than Marsh. It was an odd turn of fate. Then an event came that forced Jon's hand. A raven arrived from Winterfell, addressed to the Night's Watch in general, but the letter opened with a greeting to Jon Snow. That was suspicious in itself. The text was penned in neat script, claiming to be from Sansa Stark. She wrote that she was wed to Ramsay Bolton, some new travesty of politics, and begged for help from any loyal men of the North. She said that Ramsay was a monster, that she feared for her life, and that House Bolton intended to crush any who stood in their way. The letter ended with a desperate plea. "If you have any loyalty to my father's blood, come and save me." The Black brothers who read it were stunned. Some said it must be a trick or forgery because the real Sansa Stark was rumored to have disappeared after King Joffrey's murder. Others believed it, seeing how cunning the Boltons could be. Jon felt a pang that shot straight to his heart. If this truly was from Sansa Stark, then she was, by blood, his cousin. She'd called out to him specifically. He remembered the look on her face at King's Landing, her quiet misery, though she had never known who he really was. What would Tywin have done in this situation? Tywin would have weighed the cost and found some advantage. But Jon Snow was not Tywin Lannister. He was a brother of the Night's Watch, sworn to take no part in the realm's battles. Yet the realm's battles had come to the north, whether the Watch liked it or not. Ramsay had installed himself in Winterfell, the seat of House Stark, and if Sansa Stark was indeed his captive, it was a direct insult to Ned Stark's legacy, the same Ned Stark who had once protected Jon. But the Watch's vow was clear. They did not meddle in the wars and politics of the South. The letter caused an uproar among the senior officers. Thorne denounced it as a trap. Marsh wrung his hands over the possibility it might be genuine, but insisted they had no men to spare. Yarwick was uncertain. Meanwhile, a growing number of Black brothers muttered that the Boltons had gone too far, that they would eventually move on the wall anyway. Shouldn't the Watch try to protect Winterfell, if for no other reason than to uphold the North's stability? It was in the midst of this furious debate that Sir Alliser suddenly leveled a finger at Jon and snarled, "You, Snow, You're the one," she addressed, "if it is indeed Sansa Stark. Perhaps you're in league with them, feeding them false hope." "Netuban." Jon recoiled. "I have nothing to do with this." Thorne sneered. "Don't think I don't see how the men look to you. Think you're so noble, do you, a bastard with a fancy sword? You want to play the hero? Are you going to lead the Watch into war with the Boltons, boy?" The entire hall fell silent. Jon felt every gaze on him. He had no desire to lead the Watch to war. But he also didn't want to ignore Sansa's plea, if it was real. Everything in him roiled with conflicting loyalties. He recalled how the old lion might have weighed the pros and cons, but that was not the path Jon wished to walk. Yet neither could he simply hand Winterfell to the Boltons on a silver platter. As he wrestled with his response, a voice from the back spoke. "We need a Lord Commander, not these endless squabbles." Heads turned to see who had spoken. It was Dolorous Ed Tollett, known for his dour commentary. "We can't keep drifting like this." Bowen Marsh raised his hands, trying to quell the chatter. "We will hold a choosing, as is our custom. Brothers cast their tokens for who they deem fit to lead. We can do it on the morrow, and the one chosen will decide how we respond to this letter from Winterfell." Nekender. A rumble of agreement rose from the onlookers. Thorne grimaced, but did not object. He likely believed he would win. Marsh nodded curtly, and Yarwick sighed. The matter was settled. Jon retreated to the armory, heart hammering. The choosing was tomorrow, and he knew the men were divided between Thorne, Marsh, Yarwick, and the rumored possibility of throwing their support behind Jon. He wanted no part of a leadership struggle, but refusing would be cowardly if men truly wanted him. What if he won? Could he turn a blind eye to Sansa's plea? Could he risk a conflict with the Boltons? He felt pinned between vow and conscience, haunted by Ned Stark's memory and Tywin's specter. That night, he paced in the courtyard under a gray sky, snow drifting like pale moths. Should he stand aside and let Thorne become commander? Thorne would keep the Watch locked in a posture of hostility toward wildlings and likely acquiesce to Bolton demands to avoid open conflict. Marsh would dither. Yarwick would focus on infrastructure. None would address the looming crisis. If the Boltons truly harbored ill intent, that spelled doom for the North. which in turn threatened the Watch's ability to maintain the wall. Jon clenched his fists. He recalled the vow he'd made, to be the shield that guards the realms of men. That vow did not always align with ignoring southern affairs. Sometimes, the best way to guard the realm was to prevent a monster like Ramsay from conquering the north. And there was Sansa's plea. Could he live with himself if he ignored the last Stark he knew, a woman who might be in mortal danger? He stared at the looming ice of the wall and realized there was no easy path. "I'm not my father," he whispered into the cold. Then, as an afterthought, he added, "Whichever father that might be." A bitter laugh escaped him. Yet perhaps, in this moment, he could honor both Ned Stark's sense of decency and Tywin Lannister's pragmatic strength. If the men chose him, he would do what must be done. If they did not, he would abide by that as well. Come morning, the choosing took place in the old common hall. Each brother, old or new, placed a carved token in a bowl for the candidate he preferred. Thorne stood by, arms folded, confident. Marsh paced nervously. Yarick sighed repeatedly. Jon hovered in the back, wishing he could vanish. He was stunned to see how many men walked to a separate bowl, and quietly said, "For Jon Snow." When the count was tallied, it was close. Thorne and Jon nearly tied, with Marsh and Yarick trailing. A second vote was held between the two frontrunners. This time, the tide shifted in Jon's favor as several Marsh supporters swung to him, not wanting Thorne's harsh rule. Yarick nodded in mild relief, placing his own token for Jon. In the end, the senior men counted the tokens, and the final tally was announced. Jon Snow was chosen as the 998th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Applause rose, some men cheering, others clapping politely, and a few looking disgruntled. Thorne's face was stony. Marsh tried to mask his disappointment. Yarick gave Jon an encouraging nod. Jon stood there, numb, as if still in that dream where the weirwood and the lion door mingled. He felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Pride at the men's trust, fear of the burden, sorrow that it had come to this. Then he bowed his head. "Brothers," he said, voice steadier than he expected, "I am honored by your faith in me. I swear I will do my duty to defend the wall and guard the realms of men. I ask for your help and counsel in all that lies ahead." Another roar of approval. Jon forced himself to stand tall, to project the resolve Tywin had taught him, and the integrity Ned Stark would have wanted. This was the new path fate had laid before him. The next day he was fitted with the regalia of the Lord Commander, a new black cloak with the Watch sigil, a simple silver pin shaped like a longsword. No crowns, no golden lions or three-headed dragons. Just the unadorned black of the Watch. He summoned the senior officers to a meeting in the commander's solar that very evening. The solar was sparse, with a single window overlooking the courtyard. A map of the north covered a broad table. The men arranged themselves. Thorne, Marsh, Yarick, and a few others. Jon took a seat at the head of the table. It felt surreal. He remembered standing beside Tywin in war councils, perched on a stool, absorbing every nuance. Now, he was the one behind the table. He cleared his throat. "Brothers, we have pressing concerns. First, the influx of wildlings. Second, the Boltons' demands. And third, the letter from Sansa Stark." He hesitated over the name, uncertain if it was truly her. "We must decide how to respond." Eliezer Thorne glowered. "We respond by ignoring it. The Watch does not meddle in these matters, and if we invite a war with the Boltons, we will lose." Bowen Marsh looked uncertain. "If it is truly Lady Sansa's letter, can we ignore a plea for help? Her father was always a friend to the Watch." Thorne waved a dismissive hand. "Eddard Stark is dead. The Boltons rule the north now." Othell Yarick cleared his throat. "We do have a vow to remain neutral, but we also must consider that if Winterfell is in the hands of a madman, the north could be destabilized. That might lead to further chaos at the wall. We're already seeing Bolton soldiers harass our patrols." "Bentash." Jon interlaced his fingers. "We need more information. We don't know if the letter is genuine, or if Sansa truly is forced into marriage with Ramsay. But if she is, I believe we owe it to Ned Stark's memory to at least confirm her fate, The Boltons' hostility toward the Watch is plain, and they will only grow bolder if they think they can bully us." Thorne muttered something under his breath, then spoke up more loudly. "And how do you propose we confirm it? March an army on Winterfell? We have no army. We have scarcely 600 brothers, half of them green." Jon tried to stay calm. "We'll not launch a full assault, but we can send a small party under a flag of truce. We'll request to see Lady Sansa to confirm her well-being. If Bolton refuses, that tells us plenty." Marsh pursed his lips. "And if he welcomes our men, only to trap and butcher them? The man flays his enemies, if half the stories are true." A shiver of old memories prickled Jon's neck. Roose Bolton's calculating eyes, the rumors of Harrenhal, the Red Wedding. He nodded. "Which is why it must be a small, carefully chosen party. We present it as a courtesy call from the Lord Commander, reaffirming our neutrality but expressing concern for a Stark lady. If they reject us violently, it will be a blatant declaration of war against the Night's Watch. The Boltons may be cruel, but they aren't fools. They won't want to appear as oathbreakers to the realm by murdering black brothers under truce." Yarwick exhaled. "It's a gamble, but maybe it's the best we can do." Thorne scowled. "Madness, I say. But if you command it, I'll obey." Jon nodded, ignoring Thorne's obvious displeasure. "Very well. I'll appoint a few rangers to accompany me. I'll lead it myself." A murmur rose in the room. Thorne's eyes widened. "You? The new Lord Commander, marching right into Bolton's den? That's an even greater risk of losing our leader if things go sour." Jon set his jaw. "I won't ask men to do what I want. And if I show my face, it underlines the seriousness of our petition. I've encountered Lord Roose Bolton before, briefly. He may remember me. I think it's best if I'm there." Marsh and Yarwick glanced at each other. They could hardly forbid their own commander. Thorne looked furious, but said nothing. "All right, Lord Commander," Yarwick said. "But be sure to take men you trust. At least a dozen, not fewer." "Agreed." Jon took a quill and scratched out some notes on parchment. He would bring Dan'l Orvan Rafe, if his wound had recovered enough, Dolorous Ed, and a few other steady hands. He'd also bring Sam as a steward to keep records of any agreements, though Sam would hate that. They could travel under a black banner, with weapons sheathed. The next day, preparations began. Some men voiced worry that Jon would not return. Others insisted it was a cunning plan. Jon felt the weight of it grow heavier with each passing hour. Was he truly going to ride into Winterfell, the seat of the Boltons, after receiving a letter that might be a ruse? He recalled Tywin's lessons on power. When you move, move decisively. When you speak, do so with authority that leaves no doubt. Ned Stark's lessons had been more about honor and duty. Jon tried to meld them in his mind. Firmness and principle, cunning and decency. He hoped it would be enough. As they packed provisions, Sam approached Jon, wringing his hands. "Are you sure about this, Lord Commander? This could be very dangerous." Jon offered a grim smile. "Yes, Sam. But if we don't act, we might regret it later. The Boltons won't stop pressing us, and if they truly have Sansa Stark captive, how can we claim to protect the realm and do nothing?" Sam nodded anxiously. I suppose you're right. I'll gather the records you wanted. Maester Mullen gave me some sealed letters in case negotiation is needed. And, I'll try not to faint at the sight of flayed men." "No." Jon laid a hand on Sam's shoulder. "You'll do fine, Sam. Courage isn't never being afraid. It's being afraid and doing what needs done anyway." Sam gulped, but managed a small nod. In the swirl of final preparations, Jon paused to gaze up at the wall one last time before departing. The ice towered, silent and cold. He felt a tremor of uncertainty. He had only just begun to grasp his duties as commander, and now he was riding into the lions. No, the flayed man's den. If he fell, would the watch splinter? Yet his gut told him he could not stand idle. Perhaps that was the Stark in him. Or maybe it was just the man he had become, shaped partly by Tywin but tempered by his own conscience. At dawn they set out, a column of black riders, a black banner fluttering in the frosty breeze, and the crackling snow beneath iron-shod hooves. The gate closed behind them, and Castle Black receded into the distance. Jon spurred his mount, meeting the eyes of his companions. They looked to him for calm, for leadership. He nodded once, resolute. Together they headed south, toward Winterfell, and whatever awaited within those ancient walls. Though snow drifted down in cold clumps, and the road was little more than a half-hidden track, Jon felt a strange sense of clarity. Whatever trials lay ahead, he faced them now as himself. Jon Snow, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Not Tywin's ward, not a hidden Targaryen, but a man who had forged his own path. He would see this through. And so they rode, shadows on the white plain, carrying the Night's Watch vow in their hearts, uncertain if they would return or find only darkness at the end of the road. But onward they went, for the realms of men, for a captive Stark, and for the hope that honor might yet prevail in a land scarred by cruelty and war.